What's up guys, Drake Kelch here. I've been wanting to make this video for a long time. Today we are going to be talking about broadcasting using Red Digital Cinema cameras. I have several questions that people have asked me throughout the last couple years, so I thought I would address them all here in this video and kind of talk about why I broadcast my live streams using Red cameras. So first and foremost, I want to talk about image quality. Now, Red has been developing their sensors for a very long time, starting with the Red 1, and I feel like they have developed a superior image to most camera manufacturers, and I've used lots of cameras between Canon, Panasonic, Sony, and Red, and I find that the look that I want to achieve is so much easier using a Red camera. It allows me to do things like grade internally. I can create custom looks for how I want it to look on set or on location while we're live streaming. An example is this live stream right here. I'll link it below. But we created the output look in camera and it just looked phenomenal. And with that, I'm really talking about like their color science. It is just phenomenal. They've really figured it out with, you know, the Dragon sensor, the Helium sensor, the Gemini sensor, just how to truly represent color. I've struggled for a long time with Blackmagic. It just doesn't truly represent the color that I'm seeing with my naked eye, and I feel like with Red, it's so much closer. And if I want to go a little bit more flat and add a little bit more style to it, it also allows me to do that well with retaining all that detail and that clarity that I'm looking for. It doesn't blow out super bad with crazy highlights when you're recording concert films and things like that. Lights is a big part of that, and so we want it to not blow out but also perform well in lower light situations because the lighting's always changing. And so again, Red performs really well in that environment. And of course, they are cinematic cameras. They're designed for Hollywood, for cinema shoots, and that's really the style of broadcast that I'm going for, is that cinematic broadcast. Less traditional, more like a music video live or a concert film live. Those are the broadcasts that I'm going for and the look that I'm trying to achieve. And so Red, being as cinematic as it is, allows me all of the functions that I need to do that. So I kind of wanted to go through some pros and cons with you guys to talk about some of the things that are super easy that Red does really well, and some of the things that you're not going to get with Red. And I'm gonna call them cons, but it's not necessarily a con because the cameras are not made for broadcast. But it's just features that you should be aware of that if you're used to traditional broadcast cameras, you won't have using a Red camera. First and foremost, they're easy to rig. You have a square box like this. This is the Komodo, it's a small one, but even the DSMC2s are just a box. It's so easy to rig. There's so many accessories out there for Reds. You can have really tiny handheld setups like I've had in the past and use all the time, or you can have really large setups on a pedestal with a big zoom lens and controls and monitors and all kinds of stuff. There are so many accessories for Red. It makes it so easy to rig for how you want it and how you need it for that live stream or that broadcast. And that's one of the pros. It's just they're so flexible. Secondly, great color. We already talked about that. Phenomenal color science. You just can't go wrong with Red's color science. Third, easy to record. The mini mags, yes, they're expensive, but oh my gosh, they make it so easy, so reliable. I've never had a mini mag fail on me, and I've used 1 terabyte mini mags all the time to record some of these larger events and shows that we're doing, and it's just so easy to record. The R3D file is so nice and easy on your computer, and I've cut up to 12 multicam Reds together in post, and it's phenomenal. Like, it works so well. Outputting any frame rate that I want to, independently of the project frame rate on the DSMC2 cameras, it is phenomenal that I can select a 2997 output even if I'm internally recording in 2398. It makes a broadcasting situation so much easier. Glass options. You have so many options between, standard EF, lenses, PL lenses. They're, you know, with the bigger cameras, they have the interchangeable lens mounts, and even with the Komodo, there's 1,000 adapters out there to convert to RF. And so the lensing options is amazing. I can choose to have tiny little compact EF lenses if I want to, or I can have giant big servo zoom PL lenses if I want to. That can add so much to your shoot. They're not all gonna be looking the same. You're not using the same glass. It can really be stylistic for what glass you want to use for what shoot. And sometimes I'm using old, you know, vintage Nikon lenses, and sometimes I'm using Canon cinema zooms, and it really just depends on the broadcast and the style that I'm going for, but Red makes it easy to have all those options. They're small and light, especially this guy, the Komodo. But even the DSMC2s are super small, and if you just slap the base IO module on there with the V-mount, you can have a battery, your SDI output, an HDMI output if you want to go to a monitor, your little built-on screen, and that's it. Like, you're done. It's a very, very compact, lightweight setup, especially for handheld use. And even if you want to rig it out a little bit more, it's still super light, easy with gimbals, steady cams, all those kinds of things. They just make it really easy, again, to rig. And it kind of goes back to the rigging thing, but even handheld, they're very light, and I can operate one for a long time, way longer than I can operate like an Ursa Mini Pro handheld. And lastly, I already mentioned this, but R3D, Red Raw, is money. So stable, so easy on your computer, and looks phenomenal. So much easier than Blackmagic Raw or anything like that. I've had so many issues with Blackmagic Raw on my computer in the post world that R3D, I don't have any of those issues. It is so easy to use. Okay, let's talk about cons. Now again, prefacing this, these are cons in the broadcast environment, but Reds are not built for broadcast, so they're not necessarily cons against Red, it's just cons to using a Red in a broadcast environment. So first one, no remote camera control. Now if you're used to a broadcast setup, a traditional one, you'll have remote control of all of your broadcast cameras, so you can control your aperture and your gain and white balance and all that stuff remotely, and someone operates that from the control room live. Now, Red being a cinema camera for Hollywood, they don't have that built in, and that can be a bummer if that's something that you're looking for. But the solution is we train our ops to control their exposure themselves, to watch for exposure using their iris, ISO, or variable ND on the end of the lens. Now that takes some training and finding good ops that can watch for that. We can also call for it from the control room, but we set all of the color and everything ahead of time and just let the operator only control the brightness. I usually try to use ISO so we can leave the lens as wide open as possible, and that's where the ND comes in. If you're already at 250 ISO and you're wide open and it's still too bright, having a ND on the end can really help with controlling your exposure. Along the lines of no remote control, there's no built-in fiber. Usually some broadcast cameras that have all that, they have the built-in fiber backs, so you can plug the fiber straight in. Obviously they don't have that, but they do offer SDI output. So if you're needing to run over fiber, you just have to have a fiber to SDI or SDI to fiber converter on the camera side, which, you know, you can pick up fairly cheap. And if you're wanting to go 4K, they're a little bit more expensive, but right now the only SDI output 4K Red is the Komodo. The DSMC2s are only 3G SDI, so you're going to be limited to 1080p 60 anyways. No built-in tally, number 3. Kind of the same thing. It's this whole broadcast system that's really not built in. As you can see with me going down the list of talking about the cons here, no built-in remote, no built-in fiber, no built-in tally. Just to add to the list, there are external tally devices that you can get and add, which aren't hard, but it's just not built in. And lastly, number 4, adding to the list, no built-in comms. For me, that's okay. I usually always use wireless comms or run a clear comm system. So I'm not too worried about built-in comms. That's not really a con for me, but it's something to note. So if you want comms, you have to use something like a wired ClearComm or wireless ClearComm setup, and cheaper. You can go EarTech or something like that. That's a cheaper wireless comm system that does work really well. And lastly, you can't really use B4 lenses with the DSMC2 or the Komodo cameras. I have tried, I have a video about it. It doesn't look super well, and I know a lot of you want that really long focal length, all the servos and all that stuff. I get it. I wish I could do that too, and that's why I've landed on using just Canon cinema zooms. Like the 25-250 is a fantastic lens. It has a doubler, so you can get a little bit further. You do lose a little bit of light, but it allows you to get that 400 mil range, 500 mil range, and still look relatively really good with full servo control, so it feels like a broadcast lens. And if you really wanted to go crazy, you could do the 50-1000 Canon lens. That would be pretty nuts, but I mean, that gives you super telephoto with all the servo controls that you're used to in a broadcast setup. Now those are Canon lenses. There's a lot of other lens manufacturers out there. I tend to stick with Canon for those kinds of lenses. That wraps up the cons section. Again, not necessarily cons towards Red, just cons towards Red in the broadcast world. And I just kind of wanted to wrap it up with some things to note about using Red cameras. I mentioned this earlier, but the DSMC2 line is 3G SDI output only. So you are limited to 1080p 60. Not a bit deal breaker in my world, but it's something to note. Not a lot of people are doing 4K streams, but it is getting more popular. So if that's something that you want, I would look at the Komodo if you wanted to go Red and have a 4K SDI output. Project resolution crop. Now, again, not a big deal for me, but if you set the camera like this one, if you want to set the project to 4K for your ISO, it's going to crop the sensor. I usually record full max resolution anyway, so if I'm using this to record, it's going to be recording in 6K. Not a big deal for me. I can scale it down to 4K. It also gives me room in post, but it does crop the sensor by scaling down to 4K, 3K, 2K, those kinds of things. So that's something to be aware of. If you are broadcasting only and not recording, doesn't super matter. Set your project to 6K, output to 1080 or 4K, whatever you want to output. That doesn't crop, but the project will crop the sensor if you change the project to 4K or less. Things to note with the Komodo. The Komodo's frame rates are very limited right now, and so if you're looking to run the project in 60 frames per second as a standard broadcast, you're gonna have to crop the sensor. That's a downer with this guy. If you're running in 30 or 2398, no problem with this camera. If you want it 60, it can output 60, but it's not a project frame rate of 60, so that might be something to think about with the Komodo. I don't run into an issue with that because I never run broadcasts in 30 or 60. I'm always in 2398. Again, trying to get that cinematic feel. It's just something to note about the Komodo. And lastly, the last thing I want to note is the Komodo needs to use a 12G SDI cable, even if you're not running in 4K. It's a big deal for the connector to not break it, to not have issues. You need to use a 12G SDI cable with this camera. Even if you're running in 1080p, use 12G SDI. I know it's a little bit more expensive, but you're gonna thank me later. Well guys, this wraps up the video talking about using Red cameras for broadcast. I hope this information was helpful to you, and if you have any questions, leave them in the comments below and I'll try to answer them. And if there's enough questions, I might make a part 2 to this video. If you're interested in any videos like this, make sure to like and subscribe for more content coming out soon.